went to Zanzibar, Australia, ships at sea and islands in the Pacific. These were sites that were literally at the ends of the earth. And the risk to the young people at the sites was very high because the 60s was the end of the European colonial period. The controllers in Africa that I had were twice rescued by the Nigerian Army. Zanzibar, we'd work under the protection of the Queen's Royal Rifles, or the Gordon Highlanders, who would surround the tracking station during contact periods, bring the controllers back to the quarters, station a gunner at the top of the stairs. It became so violent at that site that we shut it down after only 3 years. But these young folks at the sites were eyes, their ears, and voice as the spacecraft passed overhead, and for their age, they were given incredible responsibilities, and many of them grew to be the leaders of Project Apollo. We first ventured into space in Project Mercury, and each one of our launches was a chapter in the history book of spaceflight. Our mistakes were violent, they were brutal, they were visible. 2 of our first 3 Atlas rockets blew up shortly after they left the launch pad. Then we launched our first Redstone rocket. We sent the firing command, the engine ignited, lifted 4 inches off the launch pad, then the engine shut down. Through some miracle, it remained upright in the launch stand. The escape tower fired and went up to about 4,000 feet and then came plummeting down to the viewing stand. Senators and congressmen ran for cover. Our rocket engineers were speaking in German. We didn't understand what they were saying. We literally did not know what to do. But we were fortunate those days because our nation understood there is no achievement without risk. And there certainly weren't any guarantees in this new business that we called spaceflight. We put 6 Americans in space in our first 2 years, and there were close calls in every one of those missions, especially in John Glenn's and Scotty Carpenter's. But we got every one of our crewmen back. And by the time that we had finished with Project Mercury, we had learned that man could live and could perform in space. But we learned much more. We learned of leaders and leadership. Leaders must have integrity. They're teachers, they're team builders, they're great listeners, and when there's trouble, they're out front. We also learned a lot about ourselves because many of us came in from aircraft flight tests, and our egos were bigger than this room. It was tough at times to get people to work together. But we knew that success would only come as a team, so we became one, and we learned to check our ego at the door every day when we came to work. So we moved into the Gemini program, and Gemini was designed to develop and test and prove the technologies that we needed in order to go to the moon. One of these technologies related to the tools and the techniques we used in designing our mission trajectories. Now, during Project Mercury for trajectory design, we had a very large group of women, about 100 of them. They were all mathematicians, and we called these women computers. Computers were people to us in the early days, not machines. And we armed these women with computers, and they traveled with us from our headquarters at Langley Field in Virginia down to the Cape for the launches. They'd get down there, they'd punch away at the keyboard and the machines, they'd write the answers down, they would plot it in graph paper, and these women would do this endlessly day after day just to design a single Mercury trajectory. This approach wasn't going to get us to the moon. It wouldn't even get 2 spacecrafts rendezvoused in Gemini, so we finally did get computers. And each one of these machines was as big as a house. 5 of them filled the entire first floor in a new mission control center in Houston. And even put a small 4,000-word computer on board the Gemini spacecraft. But the problem was we had no computer experience. So we went to the colleges and the universities throughout our nation, brought in the young people who were working with computers and laboratories. We went to the Army Missile Command at Fort Bliss in Texas and brought in the corporals and sergeants when they were discharged because the Army had been working with computers in the ground-air missile program. And we took these new recruits and merged them with the Mercury veterans. And we started working on the very edge of all knowledge, all technology, and all experience. Now, when we first started off in space, the Soviet Union had about a 2.5-year lead on us. But when Ed White stepped outside of his spacecraft in the Gemini 4 mission, we had now narrowed that lead down to mere months. And then on the next 2 missions, for the first time, we set American manned spaceflight records. First for mission duration, and then we rendezvoused 2 spacecrafts. And when we had accomplished that rendezvous, we had developed the technologies we needed to reach further into space, and we had the confidence to use these new technologies. But we continued to learn of ourselves and of our work. We learned of discipline, of focus, so intense upon the objective that we would never do anything personally that would compromise achieving that objective. We also found the value of high morale because we now knew we were succeeding because of our beliefs in our mission, our team, and in ourselves. So we moved into Apollo. We were in the consoles Friday afternoon, January 27, 1967, 1 month from launch, testing the Apollo Command and Service Module. Crew members were Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. We had worked with Gus and Ed in the Mercury and the Gemini program, and Roger was a Navy rookie preparing for his first space flight, but he was already pretty well known within the ranks because he is one of the pilots who took the pictures over Cuba during the missile crisis. Tests that Friday hadn't been going very well. We had problems with communications. We had problems with life support. Crew reported noxious odor inside the spacecraft. Test procedures just didn't fit. And we struggled through that afternoon, frequently calling a halt in the countdown, sort it out, write out the new sequence, continue on. So at 6:27 that evening, we had to call another halt before we transferred from external power into the launch pad until internal power in the spacecraft. And 4 minutes after entering that countdown hold, we were startled by screams coming from our crew, and we listened to our crew's screams as they died. And with their death came anger. Anger at ourselves because we knew we were responsible for America's first space disaster. And we wrote 2 more words into our vocabulary as mission controllers: tough and competent. Tough meaning we will never again shirk from our responsibilities because we are forever accountable for what we do, or in the case of Apollo 1 and our crew, what we failed to do. Competent, we'll never again take anything for granted. We'll never stop learning. From now on, the teams and mission control will be perfect. And we designed the badge, the emblem of the mission control team, and the price for admission to our ranks and to wear this lapel pin: discipline, morale, toughness, competence, commitment, teamwork. As a team, we may never fail. Now, in our line of business, the boss is the flight director. He has a very simple job description. It is only 1 sentence long. It says, the flight director may take any actions necessary for crew safety and mission success. During the course of the mission, there is no higher authority. And the flight director is supported by a team of between 15 and 21 controllers, people who specialize in trajectories and spacecraft systems. We have facility operators, we have planners, we have procedures writers. We have a medical doctor who looks after the team on the ground as well as the crew in space. And we have an astronaut who provides communications during the course of the mission. Mission controllers are young. They're generally in their early to the mid-20s. Flight directors in their early to mid-30s. And on July 20th, 1969, a team of young Americans, average age 26, took Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and the world to the surface of the moon, and we literally fought every step of the way to get there. When we finally shut the engine down on the lunar surface that day, we had less than 17 seconds of fuel remaining, and we were in the process of counting down to a very difficult and very risky land abort decision. But when we shut that engine down, and when the crew walked on the surface, and then they lifted off and we got those guys back home, we had fulfilled the pledge that we had made to our now dead President John F. Kennedy and the crew of Apollo 1. We launched again in November, Apollo 12. As we left the launch pad, we were hit twice by lightning. We had 3 crewmen inside a dead spacecraft thundering up towards orbit. The only thing working was booster propulsion, booster guidance. Mission control had 2 minutes to save that mission if the reactant valves to the fuel cells had closed. We voiced the instructions up to the crew.